President Trump went on television in the United States on Sunday with a pretty direct claim that, or declaration, probably is a better way to put it, that he is wanting to seek an immediate ceasefire with the Russia-Ukraine war, that he wants to bring it to an end, and that he is just looking for the best ways that he can to end the war, end the suffering and the bloodshed and the loss of territory for the Ukraine side, and finally get onto some kind of a positive trajectory that even has the outlook for hope of a future for Ukraine. In that environment, we have the current administration now barely 5 weeks left in its administration after 3 years of foolishly supporting a war that never had a chance. They seem to want to ramp this situation up one more level, and another ATACMS missile strike, U.S. long-range missiles that have to be in part guided and put on target by U.S. military personnel has launched into Russia and hit into Bryansk region there. And this is just going to cause a potential real escalation before Trump can get in. To try and help us make some kind of sense out of what's going on, we have back on the show Patrick. Welcome back to the show, first of all.
It's great to be back with you, Daniel. Yeah, well, 21stcenturywire.com is the mothership for our independent media platform.
Holy cow. Let's just, start right there. What in the world is going on with the Biden administration? Because I can tell you authoritatively from a military perspective, there is zero possibility of improving the situation for Ukraine. There is no possibility of bettering the negotiation position for Zelensky and Trump, as some have claimed. So then the question is, what the hell?
Well, you hit the nail on the head right there, Daniel. This is a tactical move. It's not strategic. In the broad sense, the United States, this position, the whole Ukraine project is on a kind of arc of failure. And the problem is, and what's dangerous is if you have a U.S. administration doing short-term tactical moves that have a lot of political motivation behind them in terms of U.S. domestic policy, or how the battle of how foreign policy is going to be shaped in the next administration. This is very dangerous. And, the United States does often have continuity from administration to administration with foreign policy, even if they're Democrat, Republican, or whatever. But there's always this kind of continuity of U.S. Long-term interests. What you don't want to do is allow short-term political concerns to shape your foreign policy and get you into a situation or a new problem that the next administration will have to repair. But this does happen. This has happened in the Middle East. This has happened with the Clinton administration, arguably as well. So, this is a problem. So this is absolute blatant sabotage by a lame duck Biden administration or a deep state that is directing this or trying to set the table for, some kind of an unwinnable negotiation environment come January. That's what it appears. It's kind of blatant at this point, actually, because this isn't the first thing that we've seen in the last month of the same type. And it's going to fail because what it's doing is giving Russia a much stronger hand globally to make its case that the United States and Kiev are only interested in escalation. And the longer this goes on, all the goodwill that NATO has accumulated for Ukraine and the little green action figure in Kiev, it's whittling away now. And with every successive move, weaker and weaker. And that's very, very important. Now, Russia can make a really great case to the world, and that matters because this is an international event and negotiations, all the spotlight will be on it. And if it doesn't happen, the longer it doesn't happen, the stronger Russia their position becomes on the ground as well, by the way, like militarily in terms of territory that it's going to control. And it will say we have the right to control because we need to extend a buffer zone. And how can you argue this now that the United States full-throated support of Israel taking over the Golan Heights as a buffer zone for its security concerns? So the U.S. and Washington are caught in a real conundrum here in terms of the credibility and the hypocrisy of the policies that they back and that they're executing.
Well, now, what do you think is the intent, anyway, as best you can piece together from the Biden administration to take this action? Because as Russian media today is pointing out, once it was confirmed that there were ATACMS missiles that were used against the Russian base, that there will be a response, and they actually said that there was going to be a response after the last round, which was round number 3 of the U.S. long-range ATACMS missiles after Biden gave permission. Russia did respond after the first round and said with the Oreshnik missile and said that there could be a lot more where this came from. Then we followed it up with another one after that. But one wonders if there was no response from the Russian side after the second one, because maybe they decided to eat this and said, all right, Trump's coming in, let's see if we can, not have this escalate so that we have a better chance to negotiate something that's in our interest on the backside of this. But now then with this, it's basically just going into the lair of a bear in his cave, shoving him and daring him to do something back by the Biden administration. So the question is, towards what end? Do they just want to force the bear to do something so that Trump doesn't have the possibility of seeking a negotiated settlement? Or what else could be behind the scenes here?
No, that's definitely one intention. It has to be that they're trying to push Russia to retaliate, and maybe retaliate in a bigger way, or retaliate closer to NATO's borders, as Jens Stoltenberg calls them. That's the intention. But Russia's been playing this game. They're trying to play checkers with a chess player. Because Russia's been playing this back and forth, and every single time they've almost held status quo. They know what the United States internal political machinations are, and the battle to dethrone Trump, to delegitimize Trump. But more broadly, it's not really about Trump. It's about delegitimizing this long-term commitment by successive U.S. administrations to expand NATO and to create the ultimate confrontation with Russia and bring war back to Europe, or at least some kind of a serious security crisis in Europe.
I keep hearing that though, but I mean, help me make sense of that. Let's take morality out of it for a second, and let's say that whether it's NATO and the Biden administration or whatever conglomeration of folks are moving in this direction, where is there any advantage to creating an actual conflict between NATO and Ukraine? Does someone think that they can contain it and that it will only be on the periphery of NATO and just keep a casus belli so that there exists in NATO, but it won't harm anybody? I mean, how does that make sense?
It is a gamble. It is a gamble on the part of the U.S. And we're saying U.S. Because in NATO and in the UK, U.S. and UK lead NATO. So when we talk about NATO, we're talking about the United States and then Britain as their partner. We're not talking about Kiev. Kiev will do what they're enabled to do by the people who supply them with their weapons, their reconnaissance, their intelligence, their expertise, and the ability to actually fire these missiles. So we're really taking Ukraine out of the picture here. They're just used as a kind of a scapegoat or a front for NATO in this case. But it is a gamble. It is a gamble. They're gambling that Russia is going to have prudence and have restraint, and is going to wait until an opportune time to make some kind of a symbolic strategic statement with maybe another round of Oreshnik missiles hitting key Ukrainian military targets. It could go further, but if this spins into, because we don't know what provocations will come between now and January 20th, there could be more. This looks like escalation. So yeah, we're having this conversation about this incident, and this is a serious incident indeed. But things could even escalate further. So they're trying to they're definitely trying to provoke Russia to respond in a way that will justify some kind of an ultimate crisis in the West and NATO's stance, saying, look, we told you about Putin. He's hitting NATO targets, or let's say something lands in Poland. I think we spoke about this before. How's that going to be interpreted by the body politic in Europe? Because that's what really matters on the front line. Are they going to be all in for Article 5 and let's go to nuclear war? No, Europe's not going to go that way. Some of the leaders might be talking tough right now, but when it comes down to the crunch, there could be a serious political crisis, and it would cause a real backlash against the United States and all the hawks in NATO. You're already seeing this reflected in the polls right across Europe. So I mean, this is a process that's already happening now. And you could view this, Daniel, as the United States pushing back against the Romanian elections, which they have been annulled because of some ridiculous excuse, but this is a Romania, a key NATO partner and a strategic location for NATO's expansion, wants to have a peace negotiation with Ukraine. So then that Romania wants peace, Hungary wants peace, Slovakia wants peace. The further we go, the AFD in Germany want peace. They're challenging for
Turkey wants peace.
Turkey, all these countries. So the United States, Washington is pushing back against an inevitable wave of de-escalation over Ukraine, and you could look at it that way.
Well, and that's gosh, but the risk. Where is the benefit to have that kind of risk? Why can't this be, again, just keep morality out of it and what's right and wrong, but just in self-interest? It seems like it's reasonable to say, all right, you know what? We have tried everything in the world for nearly 3 years, and I mean everything. And all we see is the continued contraction of what's left of the Ukrainian state and the diminishing of their manpower, the wiping out of at least 2 generations of men that they will no longer have in the future. Why can't you say, all right, let's just close this out? Let's live to fight another day. And I don't know, we can look at some way to oppose Russia later on, but let's just end this one and get ourselves stronger and move on, as opposed to going down something that has demonstrably failed in catastrophic, spectacular methods so far, and try to keep it going. Help me understand that.
Well, a lot of this is indicative of the sort of malaise that you find historically in late stage empire, whereby the leading imperial power will try to wage some kind of a conquest, and it becomes a vanity project. This happened with Rome. This has happened with successive empires throughout history, the British Empire, and now the United States Empire. So this is one of the ultimate vanity projects, because so much political capital has been sunk into this. The whole legacies are resting on this idea that Russia gets what it wants or doesn't. Russia's the loser or Russia's the winner. If you watch programs, talk shows, they're constantly haranguing guests. Are you going to allow Putin to win? In this case, we can't do that.
I've been a hit like that on TV before.
We can't embolden Putin. That word, embolden. So this is the basis of it. So this is very indicative, I think, of a culture, a political culture that is quite dangerous, actually, because the weapons that we're talking about here, which you're showing on screen, I mean, these are very dangerous, and not to mention if they fall into the wrong hands, that's another conversation. There's more weapons and arms flooded in the international system right now than ever before in history. So that's another level.
I want to keep going down this path that you just opened up there about the disconnection from reality, about some of I hesitate to call them the foreign policy elite, because that implies that they're good, but the ones that are in charge up there. Here is Kurt Volker recently asked an honest question by a questioner about, why do you think now that both Russia and Ukraine has at least saying that they're willing to have a negotiated settlement? Watch this very curious answer.
Another thing that I think is incredibly important is just how weak Russia has become over the last couple of years. We see weakness in their economy with very high inflation, high interest rates, lack of access to finances for businesses and for travelers. We see weakness in their military. They are losing forces at an incredible rate and having a difficult time replacing them. Hence, they're bringing in North Koreans, they're bringing in Iranian drones, North Korean artillery, even reports of Houthis coming to fight in the Russian winter. So it is a difficult situation for Putin. So he may be ready to have a peace of some kind. And I also think the Ukrainians may be ready as well. They will never recognize Russia's occupation of their territory, but I think they are coming to realize that they don't have the means to evict Russia militarily now.
Does anyone actually fall for that kind of stuff? Because just think, in the context of that one soundbite right there, he completely contradicts himself. He talks about Russia like they're literally on life support, like they're about to collapse at any second. But of course, Ukraine recognizes they can't actually knock them out, so they have to negotiate. I mean, if Russia was as bad as that, Ukraine would be fighting all the harder to drive them out. So those things can't coexist. But yet that's what passes for elite conversation in America today.
Yeah, you see this lack of coherence in the analysis, and it keeps going on and on. A lot of this is just really a product of propaganda that the United States, we have to face the fact that Europe, the US, the UK are some of the most propagandized societies in the world now. We're all inundated with this propaganda. What's made it even worse is the censorship of foreign media, because then we can't even read what the other media from China or Russia or some of these other countries are reporting. We can't listen to what their defense experts are claiming. We can't like measure that against our facts. So that debate doesn't happen. So what you have is this kind of inbred propaganda environment where they're talking about North Korean troops and Houthis in Ukraine. These are two items of fake news that have been completely spun into the stratosphere. And everybody, it's so funny when you listen to CNN or Fox and some of these ridiculous networks now, they all basically latch on. If there's a talking point that's floating around, everybody latches on. It just becomes a talking point memo. And you just hear every single pundit repeating it. This happens all the time. And this shows you the problem is our politicians, including Donald Trump, by the way, will get their facts and get their worldview and their foreign policy cues from Fox News or from CNN or from MSNBC, because they don't have time. And even their aides, I'm wondering, their briefers and aides are doing the same thing, or they're getting it from think tanks, and CNN's getting it from the same think tanks. So there's this kind of a circular reasoning and circular information environment in Washington where the overall quality of analysis, the overall Ray McGovern's talked about this, CIA veteran CIA analyst, the overall quality of analysis just dropping lower and lower. And so the decision making and the things that inform policy in Washington, it becomes more nonsensical, and hence the policy doesn't work. And I think there's an argument to be made there.
All you have to do is just look, let's keep it with the mainstream media about the performance and behavior on the ground. And you can see, I mean, at least I do, that it's like, wait a minute, Volker, what you're saying is just irrational. I mean, it doesn't line up with what I see even in the American press. But to your point, one of the things we hallmark on our channel here is that we do listen to both sides. We listen to the Volkers and the H.R. McMasters and some of these other people, but we also listen to the other side so that we get to make our own choice about who's right, who's wrong, based on what we can see on the ground. Toward that end, here's what the apparently very weakened Russian side is saying is their negotiating position by Vladimir Putin.
The essence of our proposal is not some kind of temporary truce or suspension of fire, as, for example, the West wants. This is not about freezing the conflict, but about its final completion. And I will say again, as soon as Kiev agrees to a similar course of events proposed today, agrees to the complete withdrawal of its troops from the DPR and LPR in the Zaporozhye and Kherson regions, and really begins this process, we are ready to begin negotiations without delaying them. I repeat, this is our principled position. Neutral, non-aligned, nuclear-free status of Ukraine, its demilitarization and denazification.
So he's been saying that literally from the outset, and that was from June 14th. Well, just a couple of days ago, Dmitry Peskov repeated again, that is still their position, where he laid out the conditions that it's the 4 oblasts and then no NATO. So that continues to be the Russian position here. And then one has to say, okay, is Volker's view that of Russia falling apart, or is the view from the physical actions on the ground truth the case? Here, for example, in recently the Wall Street Journal, there was an article about how the Russians in just the past 3 months alone have fired more than 6,000 explosive drones and missiles and FAB bombs in airstrikes that have been crushing Ukraine throughout the depth of their country, 3 times higher than the previous 3 months and 4 times higher than those same months from a year ago. And then that has led on the ground to lost territory for the Ukraine side. And you can see in this chart here that the lowest point in the middle there, where it says 50 square kilometers, was taken in the month of June. And then you see all the way through the month of November in the far right-hand column, 700 square kilometers. You see this just on this dramatic increase. And so far this month, it's going on the same pace here. So everything that you can physically see on the ground means that what Russia is asking is coming from a position of strength, not weakness. And yet we just keep going down this Volker path. So we're going to run into a roadblock here pretty soon to where our desired fictitious view of how things are is going to run into a Russia when Trump comes into office, he's wanting to negotiate a settlement. But here's the thing, is that if we think that we're going to negotiate from a position of strength, again, to your point there, if Trump's people are listening to some of the mainstream stuff, he may have a higher opinion of where his negotiating and leverage are than what's really on the ground. So my question to you is, to what extent is Putin willing to negotiate with Trump on those core issues he mentioned there, i.e., will he keep it on the current line of contact? And if he doesn't get that, what is Putin's alternative?
Well, firstly, you said something that's absolutely paramount at the beginning. You said, that's Russia's exact same position from the onset of this whole crisis, of this whole conflict. They haven't changed. They've been absolutely consistent. Who's been all over the board and all over the shop is the United States, NATO, and Zelensky, completely all over the place. So they don't really have a coherent sort of approach to this. And as they're mulling around, I think what this shows is what a catastrophe that this whole project has been, and what they're trying to do now with all of these desperate tactical moves by getting the Ukrainians to hit more targets within Russia is to somehow improve their position in negotiations in a dangerous sort of situation. I think there's kind of a crossroads here. It could either go escalate out of control, or these desperate escalations you could look at as kind of maybe the Americans are trying to improve their negotiation positions in the next administration, so they're not willing to go to all-out nuclear war. But let me tell you, Russia is ready to go all the way. They've said so publicly, and there's no reason to doubt that. And this is the same position they've had during the Cold War. This is the same position during the Soviet Union times. This is the basis for all the disarmament and anti-ballistic missile treaties and so forth between the United States, its allies, and the Soviet Union. And the other thing that people in the Trump administration and the United States in general need to understand and get their head around is that Russia doesn't look at this of Biden administration, Trump administration, like you're going to get a different deal. Russia's position is going to be absolutely stone cold, consistent, right from the onset through now into the Trump negotiation. And so if the Trump team is not a realist, if they haven't studied and don't understand the full spectrum of the issues with Ukraine that have happened, especially over the last 3 years, but also they need to understand the Minsk negotiations. They need to understand all of these different agreements and pacts. They need to understand NATO expansion and the United States' previous commitments and lapsed commitments and U-turns on previous promises. This is all important because if you're going to try to negotiate with Russia, they're calculating all of this stuff right back through history. That calculates their position today. So if the United States is not willing to acknowledge and really get in and understand that, they're way behind the 8 ball already. And Russia's just going to basically, if it's not a serious negotiation from the United States and they're just in there throwing their weight around, asking for things that they're not going to get, which you're already hearing noises about this from some of the foreign policy experts who clearly do not have an appreciation or really understanding, of what the battlefield realities are, like what you just showed on screen, but also what's happened, what's brought this situation to the current moment. You have to know that. You can't just truncate everything, every bit of context that preceded the present moment, which is what a lot of U.S. rhetoric likes to do. And by doing that, they simplify, they dumb down the picture, and you can't really have any meaningful negotiations if that's how you're going in to talk to Russia on this.
Well, and let me just kind of highlight one other challenge that the United States or specifically the Trump team is going to have, and you alluded to it just a second ago, and I want to show you a graphic demonstration of the differences between what the Trump administration is saying and what Brother Zelensky is saying. So first of all, I want to show you, here's what Trump said about his negotiating position just this past Sunday.
Should Ukraine prepare for less aid from the United States after you're sworn into office?
Yeah, probably. Sure.
You said you can end the war in 24 hours. You've even said you want to try to end it before you're sworn into office. You're actively trying to?
I am.
Have you talked to President Putin?
No, I have not.
You haven't talked to President Putin since you've been
you
elected?
Mean no? Well, I don't want to say that, but I haven't spoken to him recently.
So you've spoken to President Putin since you've been elected?
I don't want to say that. I don't want to say anything about that because I don't want to do anything that could impede the negotiation.
Yeah, so there's Trump said, yeah, I have already talked to Putin. We are moving in a direction. This is what we're going to do. So that was Sunday. Here's Zelensky yesterday talking about what he wants to do.
Нам потрібні Тауруси, як і інші далекобійні ракети, щоб бити по необхідних військових, саме військових цілях в Росії, і саме так закінчити війну якнайшвидше. Чим менше буде російський військовий потенціал, тим швидше буде досягнутий мир.
So he's saying he wants long-range weapons to weaken Russia. After 3 years of disaster, he still has this just irrational view, and there's no kinder way to put it, that he thinks a few long-range missiles can do something, and so then he launched some. Obviously, with American participation and permission, he actually took that action there, which is completely contrary to what Trump's coming to say, says that he's going to try to do. So how do you reconcile those two things if you're Trump?
I think they're trying to create a good cop, bad cop situation. There's clearly, element of the United States deep state and establishment that want to continue escalation and want to sort of, super hyper militarize Europe going forward. And, in the U.S., again, I said this, I think, on a previous program, the United States has sunk billions of dollars into new bases in Scandinavia, especially. We're talking about Denmark, Finland, Sweden, Norway, 47 new bases that are coming online just in that area. That's not even talking about Romania and the NATO expansion there, and the U.S.'s role in that. So the long-term money is going into the hyper-militarization of Europe. So that's the U.S. deep state, the defense establishment, the Democrat arm of the deep state, Obama arm, which are much more hawkish, the Clinton arm, much more hawkish against Russia. Republicans clearly are not as hawkish politically against Russia, but the same deep state, the same defense establishment that will back or be in league with Donald Trump on other issues, they're still very hawkish on Russia and Ukraine. So you've got these forces, and this is the black pill moment. The environment of Washington, it will shape the president and their policies, and as much as you want to be independent. You're dealing with a machine here, and this machine has ways of molding and shaping. The transition period is like halcyon days for any president, because you're able to do some freewheeling and talking and so forth. But once you get sworn in, and the press are on your back constantly, and then you can mobilize all of these assets to push Donald Trump. They did this in the last Trump administration. They used the Russiagate hoax to push him to be more hawkish on Russia. And Donald Trump was very hawkish in terms of sanctions, providing lethal aid to the Ukrainians, things that Obama didn't do, Trump did. And Russiagate was instrumental in that, because he had to prove that he wasn't, colluding with Putin behind the scenes. He wasn't blackmailed with compromise and all this stuff. So a lot of this, you're starting to see Ukraine is playing that role as well. They're trying to push the situation into a certain direction, then certain people will back them in Europe, and then the press and the other leaders will say, hey, why is Donald Trump abandoning Europe on Ukraine? This is outrageous. Why is he not supporting NATO? NATO consensus is this. We saw all this during the first Trump administration. They're just going to retool this up and maybe bring it up, ratchet it up to maybe a more intense level, because obviously the stakes are a lot higher now than in Trump when he was president 45. It's much higher stakes.
Let's take a look at that. That's unfortunately rational, and it lines up with a lot of the things we saw from the first Trump administration. But let's zero down on what that means in the near term here, because as you said a second ago, and I've heard from a number of other sources, that the Russian side isn't thinking there's going to be a major change from one administration to another. It's the United States, and they have said sometimes that things were worse in some regards under Trump than even under Biden prior to the outbreak of the war, of course. So the question is going to be, if the Trump team, with whatever pressures behind him, come in and say, we want a negotiated, our entry level is here, and Russia says our entry level is here, so those two things don't line up. What is Russia going to do if Trump comes in wanting to have a negotiated deal, but they're not willing to meet that minimum requirement we just played there from June?
Who holds all the cards? Russia holds all the cards. They hold all the cards on the ground, And they're increasingly so. They're going to hold the cards politically, internationally, because Russia's made it very clear they're willing to negotiate. And if that doesn't happen in any timely fashion, any meaningful way, Russia can just walk away, Daniel, if what you said happens. You know, and they're not meeting in the sort of entry point on negotiations. Russia would just step back and say, "Those are our terms." That's what the winner does in any conflict. They don't have to backpedal for the United States. But in a way, there's this kind of I don't know, this sort of ego complex in the West that everybody must conform when the United States is ready to sit at the table. If anybody doesn't conform, they're somehow sabotaging a meaningful, well-intentioned U.S. negotiation. Russia not going to play this game. That so many you can do that with weaker countries, but you're dealing with a superpower here. And so Russia's not going to enter in negotiations in the way that, you know, some of these ridiculous conferences they've held in Geneva over Syria with John Kerry and so forth. I mean, even the JCPOA as a international effort, that you're not going to get that type of situation here. This is a binary situation. Europe is a belligerent party. NATO's a belligerent party. The US is a belligerent party. Ukraine is, as far as Russia is concerned, is a belligerent party. So they're going to do everything to secure their national interests and their security perimeter. And that just increases the more these attacks. Now you're going to be, by the time negotiations come, they could be haggling over Odessa and Kharkiv. And the longer they muddle around, the U.S. lost the opportunity to settle this. It was in March 2022. It was 8 years before that with the Minsk Accords. I mean, that's the real reality. So there's no way around this. Russia knows that. But the U.S. hasn't. People in the U.S. don't even know what the Minsk Accords were, but the deep state does. Jake Sullivan does. But the average U.S. TV pundit or analyst just brushed it off as some kind of a Putin sideshow or whatever they'll call it to just diminish it. But that had a mandate at the UN Security Council level.
It's interesting, Patrick, because when Tucker Carlson interviewed Sergei Lavrov a week or so ago, one of the more telling parts of that, I think, was when he went back even before the Minsk Accords and said, listen, if during the initial uprising in February 20, at the key moment of February 2014, when Yanukovych was still in power, he said a deal had been worked out. European leaders and negotiators had come over, and we worked out a deal to where there would be early elections in May of 2014. And he said, and we knew our side was going to lose. We knew that. We were actually going to follow the rule of law and let the elections hold themselves. But he said the other side was not willing to be patient, to wait those 5 months, and then they seized power. He said, had they done that, Crimea would likely still be in Ukraine control to this day, and
100%.
all of that went farther. But then Russia says, once you've demonstrated your willingness here, then now our willingness goes down and we take action, i.e. to annex Crimea. And then, so that has, to your point a second ago, it's pretty consistent with what Russia's done all the way through. So the idea that now then they're going to give away something that they don't have to seems pretty low.
No, they're not. They've already given in terms of attacking Russia on Russian territory, hitting long-range nuclear detection radar systems, hitting Russian bases, airfields in Russia. It's already beyond the pale. All they're doing right now is we're really all just basically drafting off the goodwill of the Russian Federation not to escalate, because they would be, in their mind anyway, and perhaps within international law. Lore, they would be in their right to retaliate to the source of the threat, because we support Israel, we support other states, we support Ukraine to do that. So, I mean, once you get into a war situation, you're into a realist Hobbesian Mearsheimer world, and one party is clearly stronger than the other, and also has a greater strategic depth, has a greater strategic resolve. And the balance of resolve on this is going to be on Russia's side. So, I mean, so you have to calculate this into the broader view of entering into any kind of dialogue.
Well, anyone who's rationally thinking has to take that into consideration. But I fear, Patrick, that the so-called elite in this country and in the West in general won't or even can't come to that conclusion, and they'll have to have it explained to them on the ground in ways that we no longer have flexibility. And I think that right now, you mentioned a second ago, on the one hand, it sounds pretty close to Trump takes, over on the 20th of next month. That sounds short in one hand, but man, that's almost an eternity to wonder what else could happen in between now and then. And right now, according to what the Russians are saying, we're waiting to find out what their next reaction is going to be. And this whole conversation could change pretty quick, depending on what happens next. And I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens with that.